Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you robbed the Lord, and now he's taking it all back. The words lingered in the air like smoke, curling around the frightened faces of the congregation. Every eye locked on Pastor Raymond Bell. His voice, low and steady, cut through the stillness of the sanctuary like a blade. The sound of the shotgun being cocked echoed off the stained glass windows, amplifying the tension in the room. No one moved. No one spoke. The church, once a place of refuge, now felt like a tomb. Welcome to Criminal Mind Tales. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories. Mount Olive Baptist Church in Millbrook had been a place of peace until the day it became a prison. Every Sunday, families had gathered here, dressed in their Sunday best, offering up prayers and hymns, seeking solace. But for months now, something had changed, something insidious, and it had started with Pastor Bell. Once, he had been the face of hope, a man who had stepped into the pulpit during a time of struggle, offering words of encouragement to a weary congregation. He had come to lift them up, to breathe new life into Mount Olive, which had been losing its spirit. He promised prosperity through faith, that the Lord would reward their sacrifice. But soon, that sacrifice began to feel less like devotion and more like an obligation, a price for salvation. His sermons became obsessed with tithes, with offerings, with what they owed to God, and by extension to him. The collection plates grew heavier, but it was never enough. And then came the lists. Sister Jolene, who had been a faithful member of Mount Olive for years, had witnessed it firsthand. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A ledger kept in Pastor Bell's office, recording who had given more, and who had yet to contribute. But as the weeks passed, the lists grew more detailed. Color-coded entries, marginal notes, sums of money that seemed impossibly high. And the more they gave, the more he demanded, the more they resisted, the more he threatened. Pastor Bell was no longer preaching salvation. He was counting coins, tallying debts. Each Sunday, it felt less like a service and more like a transaction. As the weeks went on, Sister Jolene's unease grew. She noticed the way Pastor Bell began to study the congregation with a piercing gaze, as if he were measuring each of them, weighing their worth not by the size of their hearts, but by the size of their donations. He had become obsessed. When the whispers began, the rumors about a list, a private list he kept hidden away in his office, Sister Jolene had tried to ignore them, but there was no denying the changes. The man who had once preached love, compassion, and forgiveness had begun to talk about punishment, about judgment, about disobedience. And then came that Sunday. The air was thick with tension before the service had even begun. The usual Sunday hum, the murmur of children, the shuffle of feet, was absent. It was too quiet, too still. Even the organ, usually so warm and welcoming, felt cold. The congregation trickled in, but something was off. Pastor Bell stood at the pulpit, his hands gripping the edges like a man about to deliver a final verdict. His eyes were wide, his pupils dilated. There was a wildness to him, a look of absolute certainty as he scanned the faces in front of him. And when he spoke, it was like something had snapped. "The Lord has been merciful," he began, his voice ringing through the sanctuary. "But mercy runs out. Do you understand?" His eyes flicked to the congregation, pausing at each face, as if memorizing them. "He has warned you. He has given you chances. And yet, you continue to rob from him." Sister Jolene felt a cold shiver race down her spine. The message had always been about grace, about forgiveness. But this was different. His voice had changed. It was deeper now, darker. "You all sit here, week after week, pretending to worship, pretending to give. But what have you truly given?" Pastor Bell asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "You say you trust in God, but you hold back his due. And now, now you will pay the price." A few people stirred in their seats, glancing nervously at one another. No one dared speak. Pastor Bell's gaze hardened. "I've seen your faces. I know your hearts. And I know who is guilty." The shotgun was suddenly in his hands, gleaming in the dim light of the church. The congregation froze. No one moved. "Sit down," Pastor Bell commanded, "and listen." The words weren't shouted. They weren't screamed, but they carried the weight of something much darker than mere anger. It was as if the very air had thickened, suffocating the room. People began to sink back into their seats, some slowly, some trembling, but no one dared to leave. The doors were locked. The silence that followed was suffocating. And then Pastor Bell began to read. The names were not the usual prayers for health, for joy, for peace. These were names of the unworthy, the guilty, the ones who had failed to give as they were called to, the ones who had been marked in red ink on the list. Sister Rebecca, he called out first, $20 for the year. Not enough. Sister Rebecca, an older woman in the front row, turned pale. Her hand shook as she clutched her purse, her eyes wide with disbelief. The list continued. Each name was followed by a judgment. Brother James, you failed to tithe for 3 months straight. You have robbed from God. The words hung in the air like a curse. Sister Jolene's heart raced. She had seen the list. She had helped organize the records. But this was not what she had imagined. She had never thought it would come to this. A sermon of salvation had turned into a trial, a judgment of life and death. God sees everything. Pastor Bell continued, his voice gaining strength with each name. And today, he will deliver his wrath. Panic began to ripple through the congregation. A young man, Marcus, stood up near the back, his eyes wide with fear. He looked at his mother, his face pale, and began moving toward the door. That was when Pastor Bell raised a shotgun. The sound of the blast was deafening. A scream followed, sharp and full of terror. The organ was shattered, splinters of wood and metal raining down onto the congregation. Marcus had not been hit, but the message was clear. No one was safe. No one would leave. Sister Jolene watched in horror as Pastor Bell lowered the gun and returned to his list, his voice never wavering. I will not let you defy God's will. I will cleanse his house. The church had become a chamber of judgment, and outside Millbrook, Alabama had no idea what was happening behind those locked doors. Sister Jolene had to act. The walls felt like they were closing in. She knew it was only a matter of time before Pastor Bell's judgment would fall on her, too. But if she didn't do something, no one would survive. She slipped quietly out of sight, her heart pounding in her chest. This had gone too far. There was no turning back now. She had to get help before it was too late. And inside Mount Olive, the flames of judgment were already starting to grow. The sound of footsteps echoing in the dark hallways of Mount Olive Baptist Church was deafening. Sister Jolene moved as quietly as she could, her breath shallow, heart pounding in her chest. The narrow passage behind the choir stand led her toward the back offices, toward the place she had once feared to go, but now had no choice but to enter. She had seen it all. The hours of late-night meetings, the locked doors, the whispers of system she couldn't understand until now. Pastor Bell, once a man who preached forgiveness, had transformed into something else. A tyrant, a collector, a man who saw debts where others saw devotion. What had started as a small office, used for tithing records and administrative work, had slowly become his fortress. There, amidst shelves of old hymnals and dusty prayer books, he had built his empire. The walls were lined with files, manila folders filled with donation logs, financial statements, and the private records of the congregation's most intimate transactions. There were no prayers here, no salvation, only numbers and notes. A ledger of debts. The first time Sister Jolene had entered this room, she had thought nothing of it. She had assumed it was just a record-keeping system. But as weeks passed, the files began to multiply. The list became more detailed, color-coded entries, scribbled marginal notes, and a system that seemed less like bookkeeping and more like an investigation into the very souls of the people who filled the pews every Sunday. It didn't take long for her to realize that Pastor Bell's obsession wasn't with saving souls. It was with control. He wasn't simply tracking donations. He was tracking people. Her mind raced back to that morning. The way Pastor Bell had locked the doors and held the congregation captive with the threat of violence. He wasn't just punishing the disobedient. He was making an example of them, one by one, as if they were mere names on a list no different from the others. And he wasn't stopping there. Sister Jolene's footsteps quickened as she approached the door to the office. There was no time to waste. She had to find it. The list, the records. If there was one thing she knew for certain, it was that the key to this madness was hidden in those files. She paused just outside the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the doorknob. The smell of dust and old paper filled the air. It was strange how a building that had once been a house of worship now felt more like a tomb, suffocating under the weight of its secrets. The door creaked open and Sister Jolene slipped inside. The office was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb hanging overhead. The room was cluttered with papers, books, and stacks of ledgers. The desk was covered in scraps of paper, some with notes written in hastily scrawled handwriting, others with detailed calculations and calculations of what seemed to be debts owed. There, in the far corner of the room, she saw the file cabinet. It was a tall metal unit, its drawers slightly askew as if they had been rifled through. But it was the last drawer, the one at the bottom, that caught her attention. Sister Jolene hesitated for a moment before pulling the drawer open. It was filled with files, thick folders with names scrawled across them in bold, black ink. Each one contained more than just donation records. There were observations, notes, and profiles of the church members themselves. Her hands trembled as she pulled out one of the folders. Sister Rebecca, $20 for the year, owns 2 cars. Stingy heart. The words leapt off the page. Sister Jolene couldn't believe what she was reading. This wasn't just a financial record. This was a psychological assessment. Pastor Bell had been tracking everything. The members' habits, their behavior, their sins. He was using the church's resources to build his own personal army of obedience. But it didn't stop there. As she flipped through the folder, she found more disturbing notes. Some were short, jotted down quickly. Brother James, good worker but greedy, suspicious of new members. Others were more elaborate, revealing his obsessive surveillance. Sister Clara puts on a show of kindness, but don't be fooled. Selfish, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Sister Jolene felt a cold sweat creeping down her back. These weren't just financial records. They were character assassinations, detailed and brutal. Each person had been marked, categorized, and judged. Pastor Bell had become a god in his own eyes, deciding who was worthy and who was not. The door behind her creaked. Jolene spun around, heart leaping into her throat. There was a movement, a shadow, just beyond the doorway. She gasped, holding her breath. She recognized the figure at once. It was Deacon Caldwell, one of the church's longtime leaders. His face was grim, his eyes dark with the weight of what he'd seen. Sister Jolene, he whispered, his voice low and steady. You need to leave. Now. She stepped back, feeling her pulse quicken. What's going on, Deacon? What's happening? Deacon Caldwell's face was pale, his expression grim. It's worse than you think. He's got the whole congregation under his thumb. He's been watching us all. We've been too blind to see it, but now... He trailed off, his eyes shifting toward the door, as if he feared someone might be listening. What do you mean? Sister Jolene pressed. What's he planning? Deacon Caldwell swallowed hard, his throat working. I've seen the list. I've seen the names. He's not stopping with just the tithes. It's more than that. He's marking us for judgment. Sister Jolene's mind reeled. Judgment? What do you mean? Pastor Bell, Deacon Caldwell said softly, his voice filled with dread. He's planning something. He's convinced that the Lord's wrath is upon us, that we are all sinners, and he's going to cleanse the church, one way or another. Sister Jolene felt a chill creep through her veins. It was all beginning to make sense now. The sermons, the strange behavior, the hidden lists. Pastor Bell wasn't just punishing disobedience. He was planning something far darker. Do you know where he is? She asked urgently. Deacon Caldwell nodded. In the sanctuary. He's locked the doors. No one can get in or out. Sister Jolene's heart sank. The doors were locked. The congregation was trapped. And outside, the town of Millbrook had no idea that the house of God had become a house of terror. Millbrook was still. The town didn't know it. But it was already in the throes of something horrific. The streets were quiet, as they always were in the late afternoon. Families making dinner, cars idling at the traffic lights, kids playing basketball in driveways. It was a peaceful, almost idyllic scene, completely unaware of the chaos that was unfolding at Mount Olive Baptist Church, just a few miles away. Inside, the church was anything but peaceful. The sanctuary was suffocating, thick with the tension of the congregation. The normally welcoming scent of old wood and incense was now tainted by the smell of fear. The stained glass windows, so beautiful in their usual stillness, now cast strange, almost ominous shadows across the pews. It was as though the church itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Pastor Raymond Bell stood at the front, his figure taller than ever before, his red robe flowing around him like a scarlet shroud. In his hands, the shotgun was steady, an instrument of power in his grip, a symbol of the control he believed he had over the souls of his parishioners. His voice, once the soothing cadence of a preacher, was now cold and demanding, a low growl that cut through the room with sharp, terrifying clarity. "You robbed from the Lord," Pastor Bell said, his voice ringing out like a death sentence, "and now he is taking it back." The words hung in the air like a curse. Sister Jolene stood in the back of the church, pressed against the vestibule wall, her heart racing. She had seen the signs. She had been watching Pastor Bell closely for months, long before the ominous whispers about his obsession with donations and money started circulating. He had begun keeping files, jotting down notes about the congregation's giving patterns, who was tithing, who was falling short, who wasn't giving at all. He had a whole system for it, color-coded, meticulously organized. At first, Sister Jolene had dismissed it. She told herself it was just Pastor Bell's way of keeping the church afloat. But now, standing there in the shadows, watching the terror unfolding in front of her, she understood that it had gone far beyond financial records. This was about control. This was about power. And now it was about punishment. The congregation had frozen the moment Pastor Bell locked the doors. They hadn't even heard the gunshot at first. It was a silent threat that echoed much louder than any explosion ever could. No one dared to move, too afraid to breathe. Children clung to their parents, their wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. The older members, those who had been attending Mount Olive for decades, sat stiff in their pews, their hands clutching their Bibles, as if that might somehow protect them from the unfolding nightmare. The pastor's voice carried over the stillness, unnaturally calm. "You think you've been faithful," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the room, locking eyes with each person as he spoke. "You think you've been obedient. But I see the truth. You've been selfish. You've been lazy. And now, you'll pay the price for your disobedience." Sister Jolene's stomach churned. She knew it wasn't about money anymore. This was personal. The list of names he'd been reading off, each one was an indictment. A person who hadn't given enough. A person who had turned their back on the church. A person who had dared to defy him. She had helped organize the records. She had helped him, all the while telling herself it was for the good of the church. Now, she couldn't escape the realization that she had been complicit in this madness. The sound of Pastor Bell's voice droned on, but Jolene couldn't focus on the words anymore. She had to move. There was no time to waste. She needed to get to the basement. The back exit was her only chance. The basement of Mount Olive was rarely used, but Jolene had noticed it during her visits. It was a small, cramped space used for storage in the occasional Sunday school class. But what mattered was the back door. It led to a narrow alley behind the church, an escape route that could get them out of this nightmare. But she had to act fast. The church was already starting to feel like a furnace. The heat from the shotgun blast had sent waves of panic through the crowd. People were trembling, whispers turning into muffled sobs, and every breath felt thick and suffocating. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she moved quickly toward the basement door. It was too quiet now, too still. She didn't want to think about what was happening in the sanctuary, but she couldn't help it. She knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated even further. As she descended the stairs to the basement, Jolene caught a glimpse of her reflection in the dusty old mirror that hung at the foot of the stairs. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She had never been afraid of Pastor Bell before. He had been a mentor, a friend. But now, she saw him for what he really was. A man with a twisted sense of justice. A man who had lost his way. The basement was colder than the rest of the church. The air damp and musty. Jolene stepped quickly toward the utility closet. Her heart raced as she pulled open the door, scanning the shelf for the key she knew would be there. The key to the back exit. The key to freedom. But as she reached for it, a noise behind her made her stop cold. A faint scraping sound, like something shifting against the floor. Sister Jolene spun around. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Deacon Caldwell, his face ashen and drawn, his eyes wide with fear. "Sister Jolene," he whispered urgently, "you have to get out of here. We're all in danger." Jolene's mind raced, but she couldn't find the words. She had been so focused on getting out, on finding the key, that she hadn't noticed Deacon Caldwell slipping behind her. "Deacon, what are you doing here?" Jolene whispered, her voice shaky. "You need to leave. It's too dangerous." "I'm not leaving without you," Deacon Caldwell said, his voice firm despite the terror that clung to him. "You have to warn the town. We can't let him do this." Jolene's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the weight of his words settling into her chest. He was right. She had to warn the town. She had to stop this madness before it spread further. But she couldn't do it alone. They had to get out. They had to get to the town. "Okay," Jolene said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "We go to the town. But we have to be quiet. We can't let anyone know we're leaving." Deacon Caldwell nodded, his expression serious. Together, they moved toward the basement door. Sister Jolene hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the sanctuary. She could almost hear the crackle of the gunfire, the echo of Pastor Bell's words. He had locked the doors, but it didn't matter. She had to leave. She had to try. The back exit was their only chance. If you've been captivated by what's unfolded so far, trust me, there's so much more to come. The twists are just getting started. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next shocking turn in the story or the next dark tale I unravel. The fire had done its work. What remained of Mount Olive Baptist Church was a hollow shell, its once pristine walls now charred and sagging. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke, a reminder of the chaos that had erupted within. Outside, the police and firefighters were still combing through the wreckage, their faces grim as they moved carefully among the ruins. But the real work was happening inside, in the place where it all began. Inside, the walls still seemed to echo with the remnants of the screams and prayers that filled the sanctuary only hours before. The charred pews, the remnants of a stained glass window, and the remnants of the altar were all that remained of what had once been a sacred space. The fire had eaten away at the church, but it couldn't erase the memories, the fear, or the tragedy that had unfolded within those walls. And yet, there was still one place the investigators hadn't looked: the office. When they first entered the church after the fire was contained, the focus had been on finding survivors, making sure there were no bodies left behind. But now, with the worst of the smoke cleared and the building still standing, albeit in ruins, they had turned their attention to the darker corners of the church, the places no one ever really saw. Sister Jolene's actions had already proven suspicious. She was the one who had slipped out during the chaos, the one who had fled to the basement. She had been questioned extensively, but the police hadn't been able to extract anything solid from her. She was scared, yes, but she was also hiding something. And now, the search of the pastor's office would hopefully shed some light on what that something was. The door creaked open slowly, the smell of burning paper still heavy in the air. Inside, the office was a mess. Piles of papers had been scattered across the floor, some burned, some untouched. But what caught the investigators' attention were the rows of manila folders lined up neatly on the shelf. Each one had a name written on it, in bold black marker. The folders weren't labeled with the names of church members. They were much more specific than that. Faithless, the word stood out, painted in red across each folder. It was an ominous, chilling label. The investigators exchanged glances before they began pulling the folders from the shelf. Inside, there were donation logs, tallying every dollar given to the church, every tithe paid. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. No, it was the notes that followed. Each name had been meticulously recorded. Some had small scribbles about their behavior, about their loyalty to the church, and their worthiness. Others had long, detailed notes, longer than they should have been. The words jumped off the page like poison, dripping with judgment. Sister L, 5% last year, neglects the tithe faithfully, could be struggling financially, but we know she spends money on luxuries. Brother K, claps during service but never contributes, seems more interested in appearances than in service. Deacon R, cold, suspiciously secretive, maybe hiding something about his past. The tone in each note was the same, detached, clinical, and frightening. This wasn't just a pastor keeping track of donations. It was a man slowly compiling a list of people to be judged, categorized, and ultimately controlled. The officers continued to pull more folders from the shelf, each one worse than the last. And then they found the notebook. It was small, well-worn, with a leather cover. It had no title, no markings, but the moment when the investigators opened it, the contents became clear. It was a journal, one that had been meticulously kept. And inside, the words were chilling. Pastor Bell had been tracking more than just tithes. He had been tracking personalities, behavior, the very souls of his congregation. He had a system. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. The churchgoers were divided into categories, those who were loyal, those who were doubtful, and those who had been marked. The marked were the ones who had failed in his eyes. They were the ones who hadn't followed the rules, the ones who had somehow fallen short. The more they read, the more the officers realized that this wasn't about God. This was about power. Pastor Bell had become a man obsessed with controlling his flock. He had blurred the lines between faith and fear until they were indistinguishable. Judgment Day is coming. One note read, "Those who fail will be exposed." The investigators' skin crawled as they closed the journal. They had already found a vision board in the back office, a map of names and faces, each one marked with a color-coded system. There were crosses, circles, and, in some cases, a large X slashed across the photos of certain members. These were the people Pastor Bell had deemed unworthy, and he had planned to deal with them. But the most terrifying thing of all was the final note, the one written just days before the fire. "It's time," it read. "They've ignored me too long. I've been patient, but now it's time for the final act. I'll cleanse the house of the disobedient. They'll see the price of their sins." The officers stood there for a long moment, the weight of what they had discovered sinking in. This wasn't just a church. It had become a prison, a place of torment, fear, and judgment. Pastor Bell had been playing a deadly game, and now it was clear just how far he had been willing to go to make his twisted vision a reality. And Sister Jolene, she had known. She hadn't just been a victim of Bell's paranoia and obsession. She had been complicit. The files, the lists, the vision board, she had helped create it all. She had seen the warning signs, the strange way Bell had been acting, but she had chosen to ignore it. And now, she was paying the price. The officers left the office, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on their shoulders. They had learned that there was more to this church than anyone could have imagined. Mount Olive wasn't just a place of worship. It was a sanctuary for darkness. And the fire had only been the beginning. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the rubble of the church. The investigation was far from over, but the truth was beginning to come into focus. Pastor Bell had not only destroyed the lives of his congregation, he had destroyed the very essence of what a church was supposed to be. He had turned faith into fear and worship into war. And now, the town of Millbrook was left to pick up the pieces. But the scars of what had happened at Mount Olive would last long after the ashes had settled. The officers gathered their evidence and made their way toward the police cars. The fire may have been put out, but the damage was far from over. The real question now was, who else had been complicit in Bell's twisted plans? And what, exactly, had been his ultimate goal? The town would soon find out. But for now, they could only wait. The investigation was escalating. But so was the tension in Millbrook. News of the Mount Olive tragedy had spread like wildfire through the town, carried by whispers and hushed conversations. People, once certain of the safety in their small town, now found themselves questioning everything. Was this just the tip of the iceberg? Was this just one deranged pastor, or had the darkness inside Mount Olive festered unnoticed for years? Detective Samuel Green leaned against the hood of his car outside the charred remains of Mount Olive Baptist Church. The ground was still warm beneath his boots, but the fire itself had been extinguished. What lingered was a sense of unease, a feeling that something darker was hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed. The report from Sister Jolene, although shaky, had been the breakthrough they needed. Her confession about the files and the vision board had confirmed their worst fears. But even as Green stared at the burned-out church, he knew there were more layers to peel back, more stories buried deep in the ashes of Mount Olive. He couldn't shake the image of Pastor Raymond Bell's cold demeanor as he had preached to his congregation. Righteous fury mixed with something far more dangerous. Bell hadn't just been a religious leader. He had been a puppet master, pulling the strings of a community that trusted him completely. Green's mind raced. How had no one seen it coming? His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Officer Jenny Carter, the lead officer at the scene. "You need to see this. It's the church basement." Green frowned. The basement had been cleared earlier that day, but they hadn't thought to search it thoroughly. Something about the way the text was worded. Something felt off. He threw his jacket over his shoulders and strode toward his car. The basement of Mount Olive had once been used for Sunday school classes, storage, and church gatherings. Seemingly innocent enough. But now it felt like a tomb. The stairs creaked under Green's weight as he descended, the low hum of fluorescent lights buzzing in the silence. When he reached the bottom, he saw Jenny standing near an old wooden door. Her face was pale, eyes wide. She was clearly shaken. "What's going on?" Green asked, his voice steady. Jenny didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It looked like nothing more than an old utility closet. But as Green stepped inside, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them. Some were of Mount Olive's congregation, but many others were of people Green didn't recognize. They were pinned to the wall, faces circled in red marker. Some had notes written beside them, scribbled in the same paranoid handwriting he had seen in the files at Pastor Bell's office. "She's lying. Hiding something." Marked for judgment. Green's eyes widened as he studied the photos. Bell hadn't just been tracking donations. He had been tracking people's every move. He had been watching them, judging them, deciding who was worthy of his approval and who was not. One particular photo caught Green's attention. It was a picture of a young woman, her face glowing with a warm smile as she stood outside the church. But beside her photo, there was a note that sent a shiver through his spine. Sister Joy, innocent on the outside, but a liar. Watch her. Green felt a tightness in his chest. He knew Sister Joy. She had been one of the first people to speak out after the fire, a beloved member of the congregation. Her warm presence had been felt in every service. She had been there when the fire broke out, standing near the front with her young daughter. But now, according to Pastor Bell, she was on his list. And this note was only the beginning. Who else is on this? Green muttered, his heart racing as he flipped through the photos. He had to know. Jenny didn't respond, her eyes scanning the room, her hand hovering over a folder on the floor. Slowly, she picked it up and handed it to him. Inside, there were more photos, even more disturbing notes. "There's a pattern," Green said, flipping to the pages quickly. Bell wasn't just judging people. He was gathering intel on them, deciding their fate. "But why?" Jenny asked, her voice shaking. Green's mind raced. He had seen enough twisted behavior in his career to know that this was far beyond religious zealotry. It was personal. Pastor Bell wasn't just angry at his congregation. He was angry at them for failing him, for not following his every command. The money, the tithes, they were just the surface. The deeper issue was power, control, and the people on these photos were the ones Bell had deemed unworthy of his mercy. They were the marked ones. He flipped to the final photograph in the folder and felt his breath catch in his throat. It was a picture of Sister Jolene, taken from a distance, with a note scribbled across the bottom. "She knows too much." Green's stomach churned. Sister Jolene had been Belle's right-hand woman. She had helped him organize the files, the donation records, the color-coded system. But now, seeing her face in this pile of judgment, Green realized something far darker. Belle had seen her as a threat, and this was why she had left so suddenly during the chaos. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Officer Carter standing in the doorway, holding another stack of papers. "Sir, we got something else." She handed him the papers with a grim expression. Green unfolded the papers and stared at them in disbelief. They were printouts of emails sent from Pastor Bell's account to an unknown recipient. The content of these emails was shocking. "The time is near. The flock must be purified. I'm preparing them. They will learn the cost of disobedience. Judgment Day is upon us." It was clear now that Pastor Bell had been preparing for this moment long before the fire. He had been laying the groundwork, collecting information, keeping tabs on everyone around him, and all of this twisted obsession, had been building to a violent, destructive conclusion. Green felt the weight of the investigation settle deeper into his chest. The case was far from over, and it was getting darker by the minute. "Get me everything you can on Sister Jolene," Green said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "Find out who she was in contact with, who she talked to. We need to know what she's hiding." Jenny nodded, already pulling out her phone. But Green wasn't done. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something even deeper going on here. Pastor Bell wasn't just some isolated maniac. There were others involved. Others who had helped him build this empire of fear and control. As he left the basement, Green's mind raced. He had to find the connection between Sister Jolene, Pastor Bell, and the rest of the congregation. Someone had known something. Someone had been complicit. And now, it was up to him to uncover the rest of the story. The case was growing more complex by the hour. The shadows that had once clung to Mount Olive now seemed to spread throughout the town of Millbrook, and Green feared the truth was even more sinister than he could imagine. The church was gone. The fire had consumed it. But the darkness, the real darkness, still lingered in the people, and Green was determined to expose it all. The wind had picked up, a sharp chill cutting through the streets of Millbrook. Detective Samuel Green stood on the edge of the abandoned Mount Olive property, staring at the charred remnants of the church. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, leaving only a cold, gray sky. He'd spent hours going over the evidence, trying to piece together what had driven Pastor Raymond Bell to such extremes. Every detail felt like a part of a puzzle, but the larger image, the one that tied it all together, eluded him. The email prints, the photos of the congregation, the strange notes scribbled in the margins, all of it had been leading him somewhere. But where? Bell's obsession with money and control was clear, but there was something deeper, something more insidious that Green couldn't quite put his finger on. It wasn't just about obedience. It was something darker, and it had its roots in Millbrook itself. Green's phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw a text from Officer Jenny Carter. "I found something. You need to see this. It's about Sister Jolene." He was already in his car, speeding down the narrow roads toward the police station before his mind had fully processed a message. The air inside his car felt thick, suffocating, as if the town itself was holding its breath. When Green arrived at the station, Carter was waiting for him by the front door. She led him to a small conference room at the back, where a stack of papers was waiting on the table. "I didn't want to bring this up earlier, but I think you need to see it," Jenny said, her voice hesitant. Green raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Her connections. Sister Jolene," Carter said, her eyes flickering to the pile of documents. "I dug deeper, and she wasn't just working for Bell." Green's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Carter pulled out a series of photos and documents from the folder, laying them out on the table in front of him. The first photograph was one Green hadn't seen before, Sister Jolene, but this time she wasn't standing in the church. She was at a restaurant, sitting with a man Green didn't recognize. The man was older, with graying hair and a sharp, calculating look in his eyes. The second photo made his stomach turn. It was of Jolene, standing beside a woman who had been reported missing a week before the fire. Kendra Williams, a local journalist who had disappeared without a trace just days after she started asking questions about Mount Olive. The documents that followed were a series of email exchanges between Jolene and the missing journalist, Kendra Williams. The emails were about Bell's finances, his secretive behavior, and rumors of something much darker hidden beneath the surface of the church. Kendra had been on the verge of publishing a story that could bring down Mount Olive and Pastor Bell before she vanished. Green flipped through the papers quickly, his mind racing. There were more connections here than he'd imagined. Jolene wasn't just a pawn in Bell's twisted game. She was deeply involved in whatever was happening behind closed doors. He looked up at Carter. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was calculated. Bell didn't act alone. Jenny nodded. I think Jolene knew more than she let on. She was too involved in the finances, the list, and now Kendra Williams. Green let out a sharp breath. We need to find out where she is. Jolene is the key to this entire case. If she's been hiding something, we need to uncover it before anyone else gets hurt. Green's mind was buzzing with new information. Jolene had been involved with Kendra, and Kendra had been digging into Bell's finances. Could it be that the missing journalist had stumbled upon the same things Green had found? The color-coded donation system, the list of faithful and faithless, and the bizarre way Pastor Bell had been keeping tabs on everyone? It was starting to feel like a conspiracy, one that went deeper than the church itself. He stood up, his thoughts moving quickly. Let's get a team together. We need to track down Jolene. And we need to talk to anyone who might know something about Kendra Williams. The night was dark as Green and Carter drove to the last known address for Sister Jolene. The streets were empty, the houses darkened, a haunting quiet that seemed to suffocate everything around them. When they arrived at the small suburban home, the lights were out and the house seemed abandoned. But Green knew better. Jolene wouldn't have left without a trace. Green knocked sharply on the door, his hand lingering on the brass knocker for a second longer than necessary. He could hear movement inside, the faint shuffle of footsteps, the quick movement of furniture. Then the door cracked open just a few inches. Detective Green. Jolene's voice was shaky, almost too quiet. Open the door, Sister Jolene, Green said, his tone firm. We need to talk. There was a long pause before Jolene opened the door completely, her face pale. Her eyes were wide, almost like a deer caught in headlights. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Jolene whispered, backing away from the door. Then why didn't you come forward sooner? Green asked, stepping inside. I couldn't. I didn't know who to trust. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would stop, but now it's too late. Jolene's voice cracked as she spoke, the weight of her words crushing the air between them. Too late for what? Carter asked, her voice sharp. Too late for who? Jolene swallowed hard, shaking her head. The people who were supposed to help Bell. They wanted to take control, just like him. The fire, it wasn't just about him. He had help. I never knew how deep it went. Green's heart was racing now, his mind already working ahead. He took a step closer. Who helped him, Jolene? Who's been pulling the strings behind this? She hesitated, the fear in her eyes evident. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a loud crash from the back of the house interrupted her. Jolene's face went ghostly white. She turned to the window and froze, staring into the dark yard. What's happening? Carter asked, reaching for her gun. Jolene didn't answer. Instead, she backed away from the door, her eyes fixed on something outside. Green followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. A figure was standing in the yard, silhouetted by the light from the street lamp. It was hard to make out any details in the darkness, but Green could tell it was a man, and he was holding something. Get down! Green shouted, pulling Jolene to the floor. But it was too late. The shot rang out. The world seemed to hold its breath. The sound of the gunshot echoed to the neighborhood, breaking the stillness of the night. Jolene screamed, her voice high-pitched and filled with terror. Detective Green instinctively pulled her to ground, his body shielding hers as he scanned the yard through the window. Carter had already moved to the back door, her gun drawn, eyes sharp. Stay down, she muttered, eyes flicking between the open door and the yard. Green's mind raced. He didn't know who was out there, but something told him they weren't here to negotiate. His eyes locked on the figure in the yard, now moving slowly toward the house. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and his movements were deliberate, as though he knew exactly where to go and what to do. "Who is that?" Green muttered under his breath, his voice low, almost to himself. Jolene shook her head, still trembling. I don't know. I don't know him." There was another crunch of gravel, this time closer. Green held his breath, but his instincts told him they had no time to waste. He reached for his phone, sending a quick text to Carter. "Get the backup here. Now." The seconds seemed to stretch on forever. The tension was palpable, the silence so heavy it made Green's ears ring. The man outside had stopped moving. For a moment, everything felt still, as if the night itself had taken a breath and then let it out all at once. Suddenly, the back door swung open with a loud bang. Green spun toward it, his pulse quickening. Carter stepped inside, breathing heavily, eyes wide with panic. "Detective, we got a problem," she said, her voice frantic. "There's more than one of them." Green's stomach sank. "What do you mean, more than one?" Carter moved a window, pushing it open just enough to peer outside. "I saw at least 2 other figures in the yard, moving in the shadows. And there's something strange about the way they're walking. It's like they're coordinated." Green cursed under his breath. "This isn't random. This is a setup. Jolene, we need answers. Now." But Jolene, who had been silent up until now, seemed far too shaken to provide any useful information. She stared out the window, her eyes wide, lips trembling as she mouthed something almost inaudible. "What is it?" Green asked, moving closer. It's him. It's Bell," she whispered. Her voice was barely a breath. "I think he's still alive." Green froze. "What do you mean Bell's alive? We saw his body." "We?" "I don't know how," Jolene interrupted, her eyes wild now. "But they're trying to finish what he started. They've been coming for me, coming for us. For weeks. I thought if I kept my head down, it would stop. But now it's too late." Green's mind reeled. Bell was dead. They confirmed it. He had died in the fire. Or at least, they thought he had. But if Bell wasn't dead, if someone was trying to finish his twisted plan, they were all in grave danger. "Who's coming for you?" Carter asked urgently, her eyes darting between Jolene and Green. "And why?" Jolene's hands were trembling as she pressed them to her temples, trying to steady her breath. "I was part of it. I didn't mean to be, but I was." Bell had a plan, something bigger than just the church. He didn't just want money. He wanted control. And A loud crash from outside interrupted her, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots crunching against the gravel. Green felt the hairs on the back of his neck. "Stand up. Stay down," Green shouted, pushing both Carter and Jolene further behind the couch. He grabbed his gun and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. A figure appeared in the yard again, this time with a flickering flashlight. The figure moved like it was searching for something, or someone. "We need to get out of here," Green muttered, his heart pounding. "Now." Carter nodded, her grip on her gun tightening. But before they could make a move, the door slammed open again, this time with a force so powerful it sent the lock flying across the room. 3 men stood in the doorway, all wearing dark, tactical gear. Their faces were obscured by masks, but their posture screamed authority. "Stay where you are," one of the men barked, his voice sharp and cold. Green didn't hesitate. He was on his feet in an instant, gun raised. Carter followed his lead, positioning herself in front of Jolene. But it was too late. The men moved quickly, too fast, and one of them was already on Green, knocking the gun from his hand with a forceful shove. The room went chaotic in an instant, a blur of movement as Carter fired off a warning shot into the ceiling. "Stop. Don't do this," Carter shouted, but it was clear these men were not interested in talking. Jolene was crying now, her face contorted with terror as the men moved toward her. "Jolene, what the hell is going on?" Green demanded, struggling to break free from the hold of the man restraining him. I didn't know it would go this far. Jolene sobbed. I thought it was just Bell, but it wasn't. He had followers. He had people all over the town, and they're the ones pulling the strings now. They're the ones who set everything in motion. The men moved faster now, secure in the room, their eyes scanning the walls, the floor. Green knew they weren't just here for Jolene. They were here for him too. And Carter. They were going to make sure there were no witnesses. You don't understand, Jolene continued, her voice shaking. Bell's death, it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. They have a plan, and they'll stop at nothing to finish it. A sick realization dawned on Green as he listened to her words. Bell hadn't just been a rogue pastor. He had been part of something larger, a dark undercurrent of power and control that had wormed its way through Millbrook's deepest corners. And now, the ones who followed him were ready to finish what he'd started. The man holding Green let go suddenly, and Green spun to face him. But before he could make a move, the room went black. The power cut out, leaving them in complete darkness. Shit, Carter hissed, reaching for her flashlight. Stay close, Green ordered, his pulse racing. He could hear the sound of footsteps retreating, but it wasn't just one set of footsteps. There was a rhythm to them, the sound of a larger group moving in sync. Jolene's voice broke through the darkness, quiet but filled with fear. They're coming for all of us. Green felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a robbery. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was something planned, orchestrated, and now the town of Millbrook was in the crosshairs. The door slammed open again, this time with more force than before, and a new figure stood in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, and his silhouette was unmistakable. Detective Green, the man said, his voice smooth and cold. You're too late. The figure in the doorway seemed to grow taller with each passing second. Detective Green's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the voice, even before the man stepped fully into the room. Bell. Carter's voice was a whisper of disbelief, her hand trembling on the flashlight. It wasn't possible. He had died. They had seen his body, charred and lifeless, in the ruins of Mount Olive Baptist Church. But this man, standing in the dim light, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe, had a familiar, sinister aura, and his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes. Detective, the man spoke again, his tone dripping with mockery. You thought you knew the truth, but the truth, detective, is always more elusive than you can imagine. Green's mind raced, tried to make sense of the impossible. Was this a twin? A doppelganger? No. The man's walk, the way he moved, it was unmistakable. This was Raymond Bell, alive. Or, at least, he looked the part. Impossible, Green muttered under his breath, his mind reeling. Detective, Bell said again, stepping into the room fully. I understand your confusion, but let me assure you I am no ghost. I am very much alive. And everything you think you know, it's part of the lie. Carter's gun was raised, but Green put a hand on her arm, signaling her to hold fire. Something wasn't right, and firing wouldn't answer their questions. Where's your shotgun, Pastor? Green asked, trying to steady his breathing. You killed 9 people. You locked your congregation in a church and burned it to the ground. And now, here you are, walking like nothing happened. Bell's lips curled into a smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. You think that was the end? No, detective. That was just the beginning. You see, the church was never just a place of worship for me. It was the perfect vessel, the perfect system for something much greater. Green stepped forward, his fists clenched. What are you talking about? You're telling me all those deaths, the fire, the chaos, everything was part of some plan? Bell's eyes glinted in the low light. Yes, everything. And you're going to help me finish it. Help you? Carter's voice was a mixture of disbelief and anger. We're not helping you do anything. The man, Bell, only smiled wider. Oh, you're already helping. You just don't know it yet. Jolene, still cowering near the couch, shuddered. You don't understand. He's been building this network for years. The donations, the files, the lists. It wasn't about money. It was about control. And he's been preparing for this moment for far longer than any of us realized. Green's thoughts began to spiral. There had been something off about Bell from the beginning, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. A man who had used faith as a weapon, who had manipulated an entire congregation, driven them to madness and death. And now, he was here again, pulling the strings from the shadows. That's what this was all about. Green asked, his voice low, "You use your own church to create an army, a system, for control." Bell nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Green's. "You think I was just a preacher? That I was some kind of madman who snapped? No, detective. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was preparing, building a foundation for something much greater than you can comprehend." Carter stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "And now you're going to finish it?" "Finish what? What's your plan?" Bell's smile was unsettling as he began to walk around the room, his movements smooth, calculated. "You still don't understand. All of you, so much potential, so much power, wasted. I've been building my own empire, step by step, and it starts with control. You see, it's not just about the money. It's about the influence, the power that comes from knowing exactly how to push people to the brink of desperation, to create a system where you control everything they do, where they depend on you, rely on you, and most importantly, obey you." He stopped, his gaze piercing as he looked at each of them in turn. "But not everyone is meant to be a part of this. Some will break, some will fall, and others will rise to power. You, detective, you're already in deeper than you know. The moment you walked into Mount Olive, you became part of the plan. This isn't a game. This is survival." Green's pulse quickened as he pieced it together. This wasn't just about some warped idea of religion or control. This was about something much darker, something that had roots in the very fabric of Millbrook. Who else is involved? Green demanded. Who else is part of this, the system? Bell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the fireplace and picked up an old, rusted iron rod. His fingers gripped it tightly as he turned back to face the group. "Who else?" Green asked again, his tone forceful. "Who else is involved in this plan?" Bell's gaze flickered for just a moment. Then he answered, his voice low and filled with dark amusement. "You'll see soon enough. You've already met some of them." The hairs on the back of Green's neck stood up. He glanced at Carter, who looked just as confused as he felt. "I'm not asking for your cooperation, detective. I'm not even asking for your understanding. What I'm asking for is something far simpler, your silence." The door slammed open again, and two men stepped inside. They were dressed in black, masks covering their faces. Bell's men. Green could feel the weight of the room shift as the two men positioned themselves at the doorway. "Time to finish what we started," Bell said, his voice cold and steady. "Take them. Take all of them. We're going to make sure they understand who's in control." The men moved quickly, grabbing both Green and Carter by the arms, pulling them toward the back door. Jolene tried to scream, but her voice was lost in the chaos. The last thing Green saw before the door slammed shut was Bell, standing in the center of the room, his smile still intact, his eyes gleaming with that same twisted promise. And then, nothing but darkness. The sound of footsteps echoed through the narrow hallway. Green's head ached, and his vision blurred as he struggled to stay upright. His arms were bound behind him, his hands aching from the rough rope. He tried to focus, to make sense of what had happened, but it was impossible. Everything was a blur. "Detective Green," a voice called out from the shadows, and he looked up, blinking against the dim light. "Welcome to the end." It was Bell again, but this time he wasn't alone. A dozen or so figures stood behind him, all masked, all dressed in dark clothing. It was clear now, Bell hadn't been acting alone. He had built an entire network, a web of followers willing to do anything to see his twisted vision through. "We're going to make sure you understand," Bell continued, his voice full of dark satisfaction. "This is bigger than you. This is bigger than Millbrook. This is bigger than anything you've ever seen." Green's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what Bell had planned next, but whatever it was clear. The worst was yet to come. The air in the dimly lit room felt thick and suffocating, like they were trapped inside a tomb rather than a makeshift holding cell. Green's mind raced as the ropes bit into his wrists, but his focus never wavered. He had been in tight spots before, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the game more dangerous. Beside him, Carter was silent, but he could feel her presence, her stiffened posture, her readiness. She was as determined as he was, perhaps even more so. She had seen the way Bell manipulated everything, the church, the people, the system itself. And now that same influence had twisted into something far darker than he could have imagined. And somehow, Green was at the heart of it all. He wasn't sure how or why Bell had targeted him, but he could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him like a vice. Bell's men had taken them through the back halls of the old mill, an industrial area that had long since fallen into disuse. It was silent here, save for the sound of their footsteps echoing in the narrow corridors. No windows, no distractions. No way out. As the door to the room slammed shut behind them, Bell's figure emerged from the shadows, his dark, calculating eyes locked onto Green. Behind him, the group of masked figures watched with an unnerving stillness, their expressions unreadable. "Detective," Bell began, his voice cold, almost condescending. "I think you've misunderstood the situation. You're not the one in control here. You never were. You and your partner." He turned his attention to Carter. "You thought you could stop me, but you didn't even realize who was pulling the strings all along." Green tried to meet Bell's gaze, ignoring the sharp pain in his arms as he struggled against the restraints. He had to stay focused. Bell wasn't the only one with power here. "You've been playing me, all of us," Green spat, his voice hoarse but firm. "You don't control everything. You can't control the truth." Bell chuckled softly, a sound that made Green's skin crawl. "Oh, but I already have, Detective. The truth is malleable. It's a tool, just like money, just like fear, and I know how to shape it." A figure to Bell's left stepped forward, holding a stack of papers. He handed them to Bell, who glanced at them quickly, then let out a low, approving sound. Bell took a step closer to Green and Carter, holding the papers in front of them. "You see," Bell continued, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction, "the truth was always in front of you. You just didn't know how to look at it." Green narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean? What truth?" Bell flipped through the papers, his fingers grazing the edges. "This," he said, "is where the real story begins. You thought you were investigating me, but you were investigating a fraction of what I built." He held up a document. The logo at the top was familiar. It was the same one as the church's, Mount Olive Baptist. But this wasn't a church document. It was a list of names. And it wasn't just the names of people who had attended his church. It was a list of influential figures, business owners, city officials, people in power across Millbrook. Green's breath hitched as he recognized the name at the top of the list. "Mayor Daniels," he whispered. Bell's smile was full of dark satisfaction. "Exactly. Your investigation was never about me. It was always about the web I've woven around Millbrook. You see, Detective, what I started in that church was just the first thread in a much larger tapestry. You thought I was just some deranged pastor, but I was playing a much deeper game. And now, the pieces are falling into place." Green shook his head, struggling to wrap his mind around it. "You're telling me this wasn't just about the church? You've been manipulating the entire town?" Bell nodded slowly. "More than manipulating. I've been controlling, shaping, guiding the very course of Millbrook for years. I wasn't just a preacher. I was the architect of this city's future. I made sure to plant seeds in the right places, pushing the right people, pulling the right strings. And you were just a small obstacle in a much bigger plan. But that's okay. You've served your purpose." Green's pulse quickened. He had been right all along. This wasn't just about one man's delusions or a single twisted church. It was a network, a system that had infiltrated every level of society, from the very streets of Millbrook to the power structures in place. Bell's influence was like a virus, infecting everything in its path. And now, Green and Carter were caught in the crossfire. "What happens now?" Carter asked, her voice steady, despite the tension in the room. She was asking what Green was thinking. Was this the end? Was there anything left they could do? Bell looked at her with a twisted amusement. "Now we finish what we started. You're going to help me complete my plan, whether you like it or not. You see, Detective, this town is ready for change. But first, I need your help to set the stage. Help you? Green spat, his face contorting in disgust. You've already ruined enough lives. Bell waved a hand dismissively. Ruined? No, Detective. I've freed them. I've given them purpose. I've shown them the way. He turned back to the masked figures behind him. But the time for games is over. It's time for Millbrook to see what true power looks like. With a snap of his fingers, one of the figures stepped forward and removed a large, locked box on the floor. Bell unlocked it with ease, revealing an assortment of documents and a stack of photographs. You see, there are things in this town that have been hidden, Bell said, as he flipped through the documents. Things that people think are buried. But nothing stays buried forever. He looked at Green and Carter, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling fire. You've seen part of the truth, but the real story is far more complex. There are people in this town who are just as guilty as I am, and it's time they paid the price of their sins. Starting with the mayor. Green's head swam as he tried to make sense of Bell's words. His mind was flooded with questions. So many questions. Who else was involved? How far did this network reach? Was anyone safe? Bell moved closer, his presence overwhelming. I've already begun, he continued. The fire at Mount Olive wasn't an accident. It was the beginning, a cleansing. And now, I'm going to bring the whole town to its knees. It starts with the mayor, then the business owners, the officials, everyone who has helped cover up the truth. One by one, they'll all fall. And when it's over, I will be the one standing at the top, the one who has reshaped this town in my image. The masked figures around him remained silent, their faces emotionless. The room was still, save for the soft shuffle of papers, as Bell continued to reveal the scope of his plan. Do you see now? Bell asked, his voice lowering. You were never supposed to be a part of this, but you're in too deep now. There's no going back. Green's heart raced as he processed Bell's words. He had come here to stop a madman, but now he was caught in the middle of something far more dangerous. Millbrook was no longer just a town. It was a battleground, and Bell, the twisted architect, was determined to bring it all down. I won't help you, Green said through gritted teeth. Bell's smile deepened. Oh, you will. You just don't know it yet. Green's mind raced. The truth was out there, but how much of it could he uncover before Bell's grip tightened around Millbrook once and for all? The warehouse was as silent as a tomb. Dark steel beams towered overhead, their rusted frames cutting through the dim light that flickered intermittently from the overhead bulbs. The air was thick with the smell of oil and dust, and the stale scent of old wood lingered, carrying with it the weight of forgotten years. Carter and Green stood in the middle of the vast, empty space, their wrists bound by thick rope. Around them, the masked enforcers moved like shadows, silent, calculating, and deadly. Pastor Bell had planned this moment for months, possibly even years. The final act in his twisted plan for domination. He had hidden his web of control behind a mask of faith, making the town of Millbrook believe they were merely following their spiritual leader. But now, they were caught in the center of his madness. Think he'll come for us next? Carter whispered, eyes scanning the room. I don't think it matters, Green replied, his voice low but firm. We got one shot left. It's time to take it. The tension in the warehouse was palpable. Bell had spent years building his empire. His obsession with control had taken over his every action, every sermon, every breath. He carefully constructed a network of power, from manipulating the town's finances to blackmailing its most influential citizens. But as his empire grew, so did his arrogance, and that arrogance had blinded him to one crucial fact. The truth always comes out. Green's mind raced, recalling the pieces of the puzzle they had gathered over the past days. The files, the records, the city officials in his pocket. All of it was a house of cards, and Green knew that the moment one card fell, the whole structure would crumble. Suddenly, the warehouse door creaked open, cutting through the silence. Green and Carter turned, their eyes narrowing. There, standing in the entrance, was Bell himself, calm, almost serene, his eyes locked on them. Well, Bell said, his voice smooth, the same voice that had once filled the pulpit with fire and brimstone. "Detectives Green and Carter, how charming to see you both again." Green felt a surge of anger, but held it back. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. "You've taken everything from this town," Green said, his voice steady. "Your web of lies, your manipulation. It all ends tonight." Bell didn't flinch. His lips curled into a smile that was more sinister than reassuring. "Ends? No, detective. It's just beginning. You see, the town was never yours to save. You've been fighting against something far greater than yourself. This is my town, my world. And well, you're just passing through." Green's eyes narrowed. "You don't get it, Bell. You may have had the upper hand for a while, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It's out there now, and it's not going away." Bell's expression darkened, but he quickly regained his composure. He stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the two detectives. "You think I'm afraid of the truth?" Bell's voice rose slightly. "The truth is irrelevant. Power, detective, that's what matters. The truth won't save you. Not here. Not now." Carter took a step forward, her fists clenched. She'd been waiting for this moment for far too long. "You've been playing everyone, Bell. The town, the people you claim to protect. You've been using them as pawns in your game. But it's over. You're done." Bell's smile faltered, but only for a second. His hand twitched slightly, but his grip on control never wavered. "Done? No, Carter. It's you who's done. You think you've got the power to stop me? You think you've outsmarted me? I am the law in Millbrook. I always have been." Green shifted his weight, eyeing Bell carefully. His hand brushed against his coat pocket, where he had hidden the phone. He had sent the evidence, the files, the documents, the photos, out into the world hours ago. The truth had been released. It was in the hands of the news outlets, the federal agents, the town. Bell's empire was already crumbling, and Bell didn't even know it yet. "You've already lost," Green said, his voice low but sure. "Everything you built is already falling apart. The truth is out. The town knows who you really are." Bell's eyes flickered. For a brief moment, Green saw something in his eyes, a flash of fear. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Bell quickly masked it, however, with a laugh that echoed through the warehouse. "You think the truth matters? They'll come for me, detective. You think the people you're saving will rally behind you? You're wrong. They're just as corrupt as I am. They'll follow the power, and they'll always follow me." Green didn't flinch. He had seen this before. The last vestiges of arrogance. The final defiance. Bell's facade was cracking, and it wouldn't be long before the weight of his lies crushed him entirely. Suddenly, a sound cut through the air. The screeching of tires, the wail of sirens. Green knew what it meant. The cavalry had arrived. Local law enforcement, FBI agents, even news crews were already swarming the outskirts of the warehouse. Bell's time was up. Bell turned sharply, his eyes scanning the room in a moment of panic. But it was too late. The cavalry was on its way. "You can't hide from the truth forever, Bell," Carter said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The law's already on its way. You've lost." Bell's face contorted with rage, but it quickly shifted to something darker, something more dangerous. He lunged forward, a wild look in his eyes. "No one leaves this place until I say so," Bell shouted, pulling a gun from behind his back and aiming at Green. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath. But before Bell could pull the trigger, a shot rang out, a sharp crack that shattered the tension. It wasn't from Bell's gun, though. It came from behind him. A uniformed officer stepped into the doorway, his own weapon raised. Bell froze, his expression one of disbelief. "No," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "This isn't how it ends." The officer didn't hesitate. He aimed and fired once more, this time hitting Bell square in the chest. Bell's body jerked, and the weapon fell from his hand. He crumpled to the floor with a dull thud, his eyes wide in shock. Green and Carter stood still for a moment, the silence settling over them like a heavy weight. The truth had come full circle, and now it was over. Bell was no longer the puppet master. His empire had fallen apart. just as they knew it would. The sound of sirens outside grew louder, and soon the warehouse was filled with the flashing lights of law enforcement and emergency vehicles. Officers rushed in, securing the perimeter and checking on the wounded. But for Green and Carter, the battle was already won. "You did it," Carter said, her voice quiet. "We did it." Green nodded slowly, but the victory didn't feel as sweet as he thought it would. The town of Millbrook would never be the same again. The damage Bell had caused, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, was deep. It would take time to rebuild, if it could ever be rebuilt at all. "I think the hardest part is just beginning," Green said, his voice heavy with the weight of everything they'd uncovered. As the officers cuffed Bell's body and carted him away, Green and Carter stood in the middle of the warehouse, surrounded by the wreckage of Bell's empire. The sound of the sirens faded into the distance, but the truth would continue to echo. The town of Millbrook had been saved. The question was, could it ever truly heal?